Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Welcome to the show today. I'm your host, Angie Lewis. On this episode, we have Jason Greer, President and CEO of Greer Consulting Inc. He is a leader in a groundbreaking approach to diversity through neuroscience. Greer Consulting Inc. helps companies with labor relations, diversity training, and Jason has a passion and a heart for helping people. Jason, thank you so much for joining me today.
Angela, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Now, Jason, will you talk a little bit more about Greer Consulting Inc. and the great work that y'all are doing?
Oh, absolutely. Greer Consulting Inc. is my company. We founded back in 2005, really on a whim and a prayer. Our initial approach was to help organizations, both large and small, who were dealing with external labor relations issues. And we had literally taken the field of campaign management through union avoidance, and we revolutionized it. We went from barely, managing one client in 2005 to we service anywhere over 100 clients at any given time. The core of Greer Consulting has always been, it was easy to look at Greer Consulting in terms of just being a union avoidance firm. But the underlying premise behind everything we did was we believe that people will work for money, but they'll die for respect and they'll die for recognition. So I started just asking bigger questions. What is it that causes employees to decide that they want to unionize? Well, is it pay? Well, that's an easy issue. That's an easy issue because you just give them a raise. Yet what we found is even when we just give them a raise, those issues are still prevalent. So that line of thinking, those types of experiences basically revolutionized the way that we looked at our approach toward business. And that's when we started to engage more in employee relations and especially diversity management.
You mentioned diversity management. We know that there's a lot going on in the world and it's push to have more diverse workforce. What are some key elements of Greer Consulting Inc. in regards to diversity?
We've taken the field of diversity and really turned it on its head. I think that diversity, by and large, let's say theoretically, diversity makes sense. Everyone gets it. We need a more diverse workforce. Yet we struggle oftentimes, and when I say we, I'm saying the people who are actively thinking about diversity from a corporate setting, struggle with validating the reason for diversity in the workforce. Is it a monetary issue? Well, maybe. Is it a workforce issue? Well, maybe. We've taken a step back and decided to look at diversity from the perspective of neuroscience because we've been saying the same thing, we've been doing the same thing, and ultimately we end up with the same results. Those same results have been a theoretical understanding of diversity, but in terms of its application, you still have the Black employees who sit with other Black employees at lunch. You have the white employees who sit with other white employees at lunch. There's this self-segregation thing that's taking place, and I could not understand what were the underlying issues. Once I started to explore the world of neuroscience and began to understand that it's not necessarily a race thing, it's not necessarily a gender thing, it's not a sexual orientation thing, or any other category you want to create. It's a brain thing. Our brains, 99% of our decisions are made by our non-conscious brain. So if someone does something that seems to be quote unquote racist, and yet you look at them and say you're racist, the first thing out of their mouth is going to be, unless they're just a white supremacist or a Black Panther, the first thing out of their mouth is going to be, I'm not a racist. And then followed by the tagline, some of my best friends are Black, right? Well, you can continue to call someone racist all day long, but here's the thing. They might not be aware, as most of us are not aware, of their unconscious bias. And their unconscious bias might cause them to act out in a certain way, and they're completely unaware that they're acting out that way. So how we tend to look at diversity from Greer Consulting's perspective is let's get away from the judgments, let's get away from the name calling, let's get away from the labeling, and really get into the core of the behaviors. Because once we begin to understand the behaviors, now we can really create a diverse workforce because you have a better understanding of you, and I have a better understanding of me. And more importantly, we have a better understanding of how we can work together.
I would love to know what prompted this desire to go down the path of the neuroscience approach. How did you get to this point?
I have a great mentor, a gentleman by the name of Phil Dixon, and Phil introduced me to consulting back in 2005, and he and his partner, Dan Wadecki, created this organization called the Academy of Brain-Based Leadership, ABL. And in having numerous conversations with Phil and eventually conversations with Dan, I began to realize that our society has grown tremendously. I mean, look at the fact that we're doing this interview. I'm in Chicago, you're in Illinois. You can get on Facebook and you can, keep up with friends that you hadn't seen probably since grade school. You get on Instagram, Snapchat, whatever the case might be. We have social media. We have advances in technology we've never seen before. So our society has grown, but the one thing that has not kept up pace with society has been our brain. And our brain is still in the mindset of how we used to live when we lived in tribes, how we used to live when we lived prior to all this 21st century advanced civilization. Once I got an understanding from them on the brain, I started looking at our society, especially in light of the political unrest, in light of the number of police shootings of African American men, in light of all of the things that are happening in this country. I always come back to, you remember Rodney King back in 1992 during the LA riots?
Yes.
When he asked the question, why can't we all get along? And that became a popular tagline, it became a popular joke. But I'm still stuck in that. Why can't we all get along? We have an African American president, yet it seems that race relations are at an all-time low. We have African Americans and ethnic minorities are more visible in media than we've ever seen. We have more African American men who have graduated in college, despite what the popular statistics say. We have more African American who graduated in college than we've ever had before. Our poverty rate is at an all-time low. Yet we still have issues. And I just could not figure out what was the underlying cause of those issues until I started really investigating the brain. When I started to investigate the brain, I realized that it's our internal stories about other people, other members of our outgroup. And our outgroup is anyone who doesn't look like us, talk like us, think like us, therefore they're not us. That is causing so many of these issues. And it's not until we start to break down what are our commonalities so that I move you from being part of my outgroup to now being part of my in-group. Once I started to understand that, that's when I made the decision that the field of diversity management is not going to be about creating more rainbows and creating more, acronyms to convince people that diversity exists and that diversity is real. The future of diversity that I know, that I see, is the true understanding of the brain.
Jason, what are some misconceptions of diversity training?
Wonderful question. I think the biggest misconception of diversity training is that it's going to cure all your issues. I think another misconception is too many diversity trainers and too many diversity programs focus in on our differences. And what people don't understand is that the more you focus in on my difference, or our differences rather, the more embedded that becomes in our brains. So I know one of the popular things, and I know this is going to raise some issues throughout the nation when I make a statement, but I see a number of companies who have diversity panels, and they have these diversity groups. So you have the African American group, you have the Hispanic group, you have the gay and lesbian group, you have the whatever you want to go on down the line. On paper, that looks like you are actively addressing diversity, but the reality is you're actually segregating people mentally. Because if I'm only identifying as an African American man, if you're only identifying as an African American woman, what we're not identifying as is being part of this great organization. Because the organization in itself is segregating us. And what the brain does is the brain says, anybody who's in my in-group, people people who look like me, talk like me, think like me, therefore they're me, right? Whereas I think with the proper diversity approach, the proper diversity approach will be, let's get away from these categories and let's sit down and come up with an active brainstorming session on what do we have in common. Not just in terms of our job function, but tell me more about your life. Tell me about your successes. Tell me about your struggles. Tell me about the things that you think about when you're driving to work, when you're at work, and when you leave work. Because I might just find that if you're struggling to pay your mortgage, guess what? So am I. If you're worried about your kid that you just sent away to college, guess what? So am I. Do you struggle with Ted, the boss down the hall? So do I. The more commonalities that we create, the more likely we are to start to see people as being part of our in-group. And when we start to see people as being part of our in-group, now you drive productivity because we're doing it together. Because I believe in you, because you are me.
How do organizations get to that point where they're able to look for commonalities opposed to differences?
One, it's asking the bigger question, why are we here? Are we just here to print money? Because if you're just here to print money, then you're never going to worry about forming commonalities. You just work your employees to the death and they leave and then you bring in another group of employees. I think that organizations that are proactive, that ask the fundamental question of how do we get more out of our employees and how do we give more to our employees? Those are the organizations that begin to look for commonalities. Those are the organizations that begin to look at things that are going to matter the most, not just today, but 5 years down the line.
Having those commonalities, we know, can really help an organization move forward and really help them in terms of the overall culture. From your experiences, what are some cultural shifts that you've seen in organizations that have taken this approach to diversity?
Can you ask that question one more time? I want to make sure I completely understand.
Sure. What are some cultural differences? The culture of an organization, not the culture of individuals, but how has the culture in an organization changed given this approach to diversity?
Wonderful question. One, I really don't see a lot of organizations taking this approach to diversity yet, but that's only because they haven't worked with us. I think that the cultural shift that we're going to see is there's going to be less emphasis on, let me correct that statement, there's going to be a greater emphasis on diversity, but there's going to be, that emphasis is not going to look at just how many Middle Eastern employees do we add? How many Puerto Rican employees do we add? How many Bosnian employees do we add? This culture shift is going to be, how do we create bridges between all of these groups of employees such that we formed a body of commonalities that is now driving that productivity, that is now driving that innovation, and more importantly, we've created a cohesive workforce where people actually feel comfortable. You know, our brains generally fall into one of two states. It's either in a reward state or it's in a threat state. If the culture of my work environment is that you, the employee, are penalized anytime you commit some infraction, or you, the employee, are penalized anytime the boss walks down the hallway, you're putting my brain in a threat state. I am scared to be at work because I'm scared of you. But if we create a culture of cohesion, a culture of commonalities, now we move our brains away from that threat state to a reward state where I feel comfortable, I feel relaxed, and more importantly, I feel valued in the organization. Mm-hmm. Once you move people toward a reward state, the reason why the productivity increases is because you actually are upping their IQ. That's how the brain works. If you reward me, if I feel comfortable, now I'm driving productivity because now I'm presenting my best self. But you, the organization, have allowed me to present my best self because you, the organization, have embraced me.
That's a really great point you made about presenting your best self, because oftentimes people go into organizations very fragmented and aren't able to do their best work. Yeah. What's your advice for companies out there who are looking to create change in their organization and are looking to have a better understanding of diversity?
Wonderful question. And I'll approach it two ways. Excuse me. The first is, if you're looking at creating change within your organization, please do not sit in the corporate suite talking amongst a group of executives about how the organization should look. While that's great initially, if you don't include the people who are going to be impacted by the change, you've lost before you even got started. Go to the people and ask them some very basic questions. What is it you feel like you need beyond money? What is it you feel like you need to feel like you are part of a greater family? What is it you feel like you need to be more productive? But more importantly, what is it we can do for you to help you to grow? Right? When you start to get buy-in from people, you up their feelings of fairness, you up their level of autonomy, and more importantly, you up their level of security. And now when you go ahead, because the brain craves consistency, and if you just throw a bunch of changes at people without ever getting their input, they're going to rebel. Their brains are going to rebel. You're going to put them in that threat state. But if you go to them and you really get their perspective, you really get their opinions, you'd be amazed at how impactful those changes that you're talking about, that the organization is talking about making. You'll be amazed at how impactful they'll be. I think to the second part of your question, in terms of diversity, it's whether we like it or not, white males and white females are oftentimes harassed in diversity trainings because in many cases they're the ones who are made to feel guilty for racism, for sexism, for any type of ism that might exist. Hence, the threat state that many white males and white females feel or go into when they hear that it's going to be a mandatory diversity training. I think that diversity has to be inclusive. It has to be inclusive across the board, not just in terms of skin color, not just in terms of orientation, not just in terms of gender, but also in terms of ideas.
Jason, rarely have I heard someone say that diversity is connected to your idea and mindset in addition to race, gender, sexual orientation, etc. Before we close, I would love to hear about what you have coming up.
Great. Well, at 8:30 this morning, I'm going to be on WGN here in Chicago, talking about the race relations and the unfortunate Charlotte riots and the events that are happening in Tulsa, Oklahoma. September 28th, I will be speaking at for a trade group, actually, in Hilton Ballpark Village. I'm really excited about that. It'll be a full diversity presentation. In that late October, I am one of the featured speakers at the Academy for Brain-Based Leadership Neuroscience Conference, where I'll be talking about diversity in the brain. I'm really excited because we're going to have representatives from Facebook, Google, Yahoo, many of the big tech giants who are actively interested in how do we increase diversity within our workforce, but more importantly, how do we make it into an effective business tool? So there are so many great things that are happening in the horizon. I'm excited for where we're going as an organization.
Jason, thank you so much for joining me. And if people want to learn more about you or Greer Consulting Inc., how can they reach you?
Wonderful question, Angela. You can reach me at GreerConsultingInc.com for our website. You can reach me on Twitter at LaborExpert, and I am always around. So please, if you ever have any questions, if you have concerns, or you're looking for cutting-edge diversity training and diversity consulting, please reach out to us because we are changing the world one brain at a time.
Thank you, Jason. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.